the alma mater of CD over here, is playing against North Carolina at home, and this line has flip flopped, based on maybe some injury rumors about a particularly important piece of this offense in Darius Taylor, the running back for Minnesota, as well as lingering issues, quote unquote, with Daniel Jackson, which we don't really know about. But if that offense is missing Daniel Jackson, I think he's more important to the offense than Darius Taylor. Am I wrong in saying that, Christopher, or is that an overreaction?
The problem is you can't. It's hard to say that because they run the ball 50 fucking times a game, right? So it's like you don't know. But Daniel Jackson, the drop off from Daniel Jackson to anybody else in that room is significant, not only because of the pressure he takes from a defense, but also because the consistency of those guys just has not been there, right, for years now. And Darius Taylor, yes, he's absolutely very, very good, but they won games without him last year, and they brought in 5 transfers. They got a true freshman going off in camp right now. So obviously they feel much better about the depth of the running back room. But Darius Taylor, he is a game changer. And we saw him torch UNC last year as a true freshman on the road. Those 2 injuries, something to absolutely monitor when they bring out that injury report, 2 hours before kickoff or whatever it may be. The unfortunate part is I'm going to be in Minnesota, which gambling is unfortunately illegal there. So I can't even pound North Carolina in the stands there. I'll just be sitting there watching them, whatever it may be. But yeah, I want to hear you guys' thoughts on this game because I'm probably a little biased here, I won't lie, but I see a lot of good matchups. I see some interesting storylines. You guys know Max Johnson more than I would, and a lot of North Carolina fans potentially. Obviously, they might run 2 quarterback, but yeah.
Johnson. Yeah, I was high on Max Johnson. I liked his tape coming out of LSU. I liked him in his first half start last year versus Auburn. But things just fell apart, man, and he did not have the best runway to play, though. Let's talk about that Tennessee game, maybe the worst Max Johnson game of the year. But the O-line gave him no time. He didn't have a chance. And you'll have to talk to me about this North Carolina offensive line. That's probably going to make or break Max Johnson. Max Johnson needs time. That's how I feel about him. But I want to hear more about Minnesota because I'm actually high on Minnesota based on my limited information. I know Chris Dawson will give me the rundown. I see an offensive line returning 4 starters. I see adding Power 5 receivers in the portal. Talk to me about those guys. But I think if Darius Taylor's healthy, I don't see why you can't beat North Carolina at home. I don't see why you can't cover. 2 deep is back at defense for the most part. 9 starters back. You got to talk me out of Minnesota in this game because I'm hitting Minnesota on this one. This is when I make a play on.
I'll be able to do that, but Christopher,
we'll start with the positives here. Yeah, so I took Minnesota's over, I guess, on our show. I didn't obviously put money on it, but I took their over at 5.5 throughout the year just because I think the depth is much improved this year, and I do think where they really, really struggled last year was stopping the run. And their linebackers were awful. Coney Lindenberg, Matthew joked about it. I think he's an absolute bona fide all Big Ten kind of guy. He was hurt much of last year. And they were having question marks about the guy next to him, right? So it was going to be him and a new guy. Devin Williams and Maverick Bronski were kind of battling out. But when Cody Lindenberg goes down and he's not able to play and he re-injures that a couple weeks later, I mean, you got 2 inexperienced guys that are learning on the fly in the Big Ten, drinking through a fire hose. That is never a good sign. And you saw that Purdue put up a bajillion points and 300 plus yards on the ground. And that could be the problem because O'Marion Hampton is a monster, I know Matthew's got some side bets on that. He is a monster. And obviously that offensive line is question mark for North Carolina. That's where I think the advantage is.
Huge question mark.
The advantage for Minnesota is that defensive line, especially if you get into pass rushing downs, because you've got either an inexperienced quarterback and Connor Harrell, right? And then you've got Mac Johnson, who has struggled to get the ball on time. Yeah, Mac Brown, I don't trust anything he really says, to be honest. We'll see.
True. I mean, but he's no stranger to the 2 quarterback system.
He's not at all.
Mac Brown seems unhinged in his age. I kind of like it.
Yeah,
dude, he's ready to. They got a little petty match going on between PJ and Mac Brown. PJ does not release depth charts ever, and so Mac Brown was like, okay, then we won't either. And it's kind of funny to see the back and forth there. I think there's some history between those two, like good history, I think.
Yeah.
But to me, that defensive line, what you can do on 3rd and long, 2nd and long, with Ja Joyner, who's a monster. Danny Strigout getting better. Devin Eastern is flashing in the interior there. Anthony Smith, you can move up and down the line of scrimmage. Could be really, really exciting, but you have to get to that spot. And you're also up the middle of that defense. You also are replacing all world Tyler Nubin, obviously second round pick to the Giants, all time leading interception holder for Minnesota. And you got two inexperienced guys there too. So it's going to be a lot of question marks, and it's not a good time to be learning in week one, obviously, about your team, especially stopping the run. But that'll be the difference there. If I had to go anything, I'm with you. Let's go Minnesota, and let's go them to win. I think that 1.5 is some value, especially if Daniel Jackson does play, which I think he will. I think there's absolute value in that. And then also Max Brosmer, what he can do throwing the football much more consistently than Ethan Kaliakmanis did. And dare I say Tanner Morgan as well. Minnesota fans might not like that, but Max Brosmer, I like him a lot. He comes from New Hampshire, put up a lot of yards there, utilized his playmakers up and down the football field, got on the football in space, with the ball on target so they could run after catch. We'll see. I'm obviously pretty optimistic, pretty excited about this game. Could I be proven wrong? Absolutely. And I can't wait for Matthew to do that right now.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, I actually don't hate the matchup for Minnesota here, right? They get them at home. That offensive line, like North Carolina's front seven is probably strong suit of their defense. They have a couple good players in their secondary, but, K'Mon Rucker, Power Echols, right? Like having a good offensive line really helps, right? Like, and leaving that secondary out on some islands. The question is Max Brosmer going to take advantage of it, right? A guy who on the show maybe I've called Check Down Charlie a couple times. I think he's a good quarterback, guys. And then I don't want that to be misconstrued in any way, despite that very much sounding like an insult. I do think Darius Taylor is a big loss because he's such an effective receiver. Obviously he played receiver in high school. Like that's, definitely a strength of his. What Chris was referring to in the Marion Hampton is I took his over 90.5 rushing yards and prize picks yesterday. It's at 99.5 already. Got literally played up 9 yards there. So I feel pretty good about that because I don't love Minnesota's front seven aside from Cody Lindenberg and John Joyner,
And John Joyner's not a run specialist by any means.
Not at
they
all.
are going to wait to put him on the field until they can on 3rd and long, but you got to get there. You got to get there first.
Here's what scares the piss out of me though. Like that North Carolina offensive line isn't like so unproven, right? Like it is very maybe potentially not great. Also playing two quarterbacks, like look, you saw in SMU, right? Like Preston Stone maybe just needed a couple more drives to like get in a rhythm, and like that was completely stripped away from him, having Kevin Jennings, who actually played pretty okay. But I think Connor Harrell is a better quarterback than Max Johnson because Max Johnson, time to throw last year, fun fact, Connor Wigman, 2.5 seconds on average. Max Johnson, 3 seconds flat. An entire half second. Max Johnson.
Like Justin Fields type.
Yeah. That's he's just holding on to the football, man, waiting to get clobbered. So that scares me big time. I also think that if Darius Taylor's not in the game, I think North Carolina has more superstar talent than Minnesota. Sorry to offend you there, Christopher. And I think they'll be able to run the ball. Hopefully behind an offensive line that still has a lot of question marks. I just don't trust that Minnesota front seven. I'll take North Carolina -1.5. I don't love it. I really don't. Otherwise, you would have seen it. You would see it on the best bets. That's coming up later in the show. I don't love it, but definitely interesting.
Thursday night game, right?
Yeah,
Thursday night, and
nice.
both defensive coordinators. By the way, we talked about two defenses that maybe have question marks. Both of them have brand new defensive coordinators, so definitely something interesting. We saw what a coaching change, literally on Saturday with Georgia Tech. We saw what a defensive coaching change can do for some teams. So it's hard to see what's going to look like in week one.
Last thing I will say, in terms of storyline, so obviously in 2023 last season, Minnesota went down to Chapel Hill and lost 31-13, but that was with Drake May. Minnesota was in that football game in that second half, and they just could not complete passes to open receivers, and they couldn't cover. I'm forgetting the McCollum, the Georgia Tech transfer, name McCollum.
Yeah.
For anything. And Drake May also, they'd get to 3rd down and he would just do something crazy. And there's a reason why he was the top 3 pick last year, right? And he would do something, flick the wrist or scramble. And so I think the optimism for the Minnesota fans is, well, they don't have Drake May. And so maybe we have a chance. But you mentioned the star power North Carolina still has with Rucker and Hampton and Power Echols as well. The coaching matchups, you mentioned that. You hit that right in the nose. The defense coordinators, obviously, you think a similar scheme will be run by both those guys, but it'll obviously be put to the test there on Thursday night primetime Fox. Joel Klatt, Gus Johnson. I cannot wait. Those guys are great. Too bad I won't listen to them, but I watched the replay.